Hello there and welcome to another one of my videos. Today I'm talking about manual work versus intellectual work or knowledge work. What I'm talking about I have basically gotten from this book. This book is called Class As Soulcraft and it was written by Mathew B. Crawford. The author is pretty interesting on his own because he used to be a philosopher but then turned into a mechanic for vintage motorcycles. This is a kind of career switch that I don't think a lot of people do. And because he was a philosopher, he has a lot of interesting stuff to say as well. The general topic of this book, or the question that it's trying to discuss, is if the modern knowledge economy has actually made us feel less useful. And what this book basically does is that it is a defense of all the manual work, carpentry, electricians, plumbing, this kind of stuff. And at the same time it critiques our society's kind of obsession or infatuation with credentials and abstract knowledge. And so what he explores is, or he goes on a lot about the dignity and the skill and also the satisfaction that people get when they work with their hands. And he kind of ties this into meaning, because he's a philosopher, of course. And he argues that meaning comes from agency and responsibility. That if you have no responsibility or you have no agency, no control over yourself and your circumstances, it's hard to have meaning. And this makes sense, of course. But how do you tie this into manual work versus intellectual work? Well, basically, he argues that manual workers own their work more. If a mechanic works on a motorcycle and then afterwards it doesn't start, that's it's on him, you know. But at the same time, if he manages to repair a motorcycle and it then runs perfectly afterwards, then he can clearly see the result of his effort and his hard work and everything that he put into this project. And in this way, it's rewarding. And it contributes to this idea of agency and responsibility for your own work. In office jobs, on the other hand, the outcomes or the result is often spread across teams, or it is hidden behind very vague roles or very vague titles that people get when they work in an office. And he argues that there is a kind of alienation for office workers between the effort that they put in and the result that comes out of it. Because in the end, often you are going to be part of a very big team. You're essentially going to be just a small piece in a very big machine that's working on a big project. And the work that you put in you don't really get to see directly the result from it. And in a different place, not in this book, but somewhere else, I read that there's like a huge percentage of people that are working that don't believe that their job or the work that they're doing actually has a purpose or that it's useful. And so there's a bunch of people waking up, commuting to work, dealing with annoying colleagues, all of this, and they don't even think that the work that they're doing has a point. They think it's not even necessary for the society. So yes, they collect their paycheck, but this also does something in the terms of a crisis of meaning, so to say. Now, maybe that's a big exaggeration. And when I'm talking about this stuff, I'm also doing huge generalizations, just like the author is. Just because you work in an office doesn't mean that you don't see the result of your work, and doesn't mean that it's going to be insignificant in a sense when it comes to sense of meaning and these kinds of things. But these are the general ideas of the author. You can think of that however you want. Another thing that he talks about is that manual work is actually deeply intellectual. We make this distinction between manual work and intellectual work, kind of assuming that the manual work is not going to be very intellectual. But this is often wrong, and I totally agree. If you ask any farmer pretty much anything about their farm, you're gonna see how much knowledge and how much intellect is going into their everyday, into their working. A farmer can probably not just tell you how to repair every fence, but can also weld a bit, is probably pretty savvy when it comes to carpentry, knows definitely some machinery as well, can probably even tell you some bird species as well, or recognize whatever animals have been going through their fields. They have a huge amount of knowledge that is actually sometimes more impressive than people with a degree in their own specialty, you know? So manual work does not equal that it's not intellectual. And he also talks about, the author, about how we love to distinguish based on IQ instead of other traits. This makes sense in some sense, because we have to, I guess, make some distinctions between people, and IQ happens to be something that is not very easy to measure, but relatively easy to measure. You cannot do a standardized test where you evaluate people based on their empathy or their sense of responsibility or their discipline, you know? So part of it is also just how things are, I suppose. But we don't, this is something that the author also goes into. And a comment that he made that I quite enjoyed as well was that we all obsess over diversity and we love diversity, except when it is in the form of a teenager not being able to sit still in school for like 8 hours straight. This is not okay as diversity, and this is a disease. This needs to be medicated, and this needs to be fixed. We need to have everyone being able to sit still for 8 hours in school. So that was a bit of a funny commentary. This is of course this is a different topic, and this is a bit complicated to discuss, because at one point it's also about making people be able to achieve what they want to achieve, because unfortunately to make progress when it comes to academia and things like that, you have to be able to sit still. And so if you can facilitate that for someone so that they can make it through a day being focused in class, you're essentially going to help them out. This doesn't necessarily mean that you're trying to make everyone homogeneous and are against this sort of diversity. But this is a completely different topic and has nothing to do really with what I want to discuss. Another thing that he brings up is that office work is abstract and also increasingly disposable. So you used to send kids to college or university so that they would be able to get a job, because the factory jobs were being sent overseas. But now it's the other way around. Now the work that is easily replaced is the work that you can do remotely for cheaper overseas, or work that can be done by a computer better and faster than a human can. And this is kind of the reality that we are in now with AI and everything. So you send kids to university hoping they can maybe work in an office or work intellectually with computers or whatever, with Excel, all of these computer programs. But now, because of the progress made in AI, these are actually the things that computers will be able to do better than humans. So we're back to the manual labor being more safe from replacement. For example, AI will not replace a carpenter or a plumber, for example. I happen to know a plumber, actually. He's very active plumbing and drives a Mercedes, a very quick one as well. So it's going pretty good for him. Anyway, one last thing that I wanted to talk about is in the title, shop class. I'm from Sweden, so there it's called träslöjd, but what was frustrating about this is that this was basically the one refuge for people that were not so adapted to write paragraphs, to write essays and all of these things. So their last refuge was this one subject where they could work with their hands and hammer away and do whatever. But even this subject they had to ruin, so to say. Even in this subject we had to write these long reflections on our work, on our progress, all of these things. And I used to think, what a shame. this is the only subject that could be like practical and manual, and even this one you have to write endless paragraphs for. And so we really do have an obsession when it comes to this intellectual stuff, when practical stuff is also very important. And especially when practical stuff is often also very intellectual, in fact. That's pretty much all I had to say about the book. I thought it was pretty interesting, and there's some other stuff, because he's a philosopher. He brings up a ton of different things. There's some other stuff that I could talk about as well in a different video. Maybe I will, maybe I will not. But that's about it. You can comment whatever you like. You could give a thumbs up or a thumbs down. You can do what you want. And maybe I'll see you next time. Bye bye.